Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Master Lecture by Patrik Schumacher of Zaha Hadid Architects. I'm Henry Chan from the Hong Kong Design Institute. I'm the program leader of the Architectural Design Program and will be one of your moderators for today's event. Vertical Urbanism is curated by Zaha Hadid Architects for the Hong Kong Design Institute. The exhibition is an in-depth presentation of tall buildings designed by CAH over the past 15 years. Design strategies related to the urban context are highlighted as ways in which to facilitate a more sustainable and vibrant urbanism for the vertical city, addressing topics such as density, ground interface, facade, sustainability, atria, and bridges. Vertical urbanism is an emerging topic which requires a new high-rise topology as well as a new urban design strategy. High-density urbanity can facilitate integrated lives rather than merely parallel lives, thereby contributing to creativity, productivity, and thus prosperity. The Vertical Urbanism exhibition is currently held virtually until May 1st. We will open for public visits as soon as COVID restrictions here in Hong Kong are lifted. For more details, please scan the QR codes on the screen and follow HKDI Gallery for future events. For today's lecture, we're very honored to have the principal of Zaha Hadid Architects, Mr. Patrik Schumacher, to be with us. He started working with Zaha Hadid in 1988 and was seminal in developing Zaha Hadid Architects to become a 500-strong global architecture and design brand. In 1996, he founded the Design Research Laboratory at the Architectural Association, where he continues to teach. He also teaches at the Berlin Academy of Arts. In 2010, Mr. Schumacher won the Royal Institute of British Architects Sterling Prize together with Zaha Hadid. Since 2007, he has been promoting parametricism as an epochal style for the 21st century. In 2010 and 2012, he published The Autopoiesis of Architecture in 2 volumes, and recently guest edited the magazine AD and Parametricism 2.0, emphasizing on the societal relevance of parametricism. Without further ado, we will now begin Patrik Schumacher's master lecture, followed by a roundtable discussion with 8 highly respectable speakers to explore the uniqueness and the challenges of vertical urbanism in Hong Kong and in other cities.
Welcome, everybody. This is Patrik Schumacher. I will be talking about vertical urbanism. The context is our show at the Hong Kong Design Institute, that is our Zaha Hadid Architects show. I will also show at the end, though, some work from the AA Design Research Lab. This is a recorded lecture, so it's not too sterile. This is also meant to have a panel discussion, which will follow. So let's kick off. By the way, the image here is one of those attempts at a poster for the show, which was dismissed. The poster is more abstract right now, but it shows a number of our current and recent projects in the domain of complex high-rise. Some of you are knowing me and have seen my lectures know that I tend to start with this because we need to locate the contemporary architecture in a historical space, which matters. What are the main transformations in recent decades that imply a new set of challenges and opportunities for architecture and call for and invite and make possible a new style within architecture, but also a new form of urbanization. And that is the transformation from Fordism to post-Fordism and the emergence of what I call the post-Fordist network society, which is a global society, global knowledge economy. And I think that recent years and months have further accelerate the globalization element. Urbanism of the 20th century, modernism, was premised on the industrial city of mechanical mass reproduction. it implied actually also zoning separation, specialization, and pulling apart the city fabric into specialist domains, because there was a very stable division of labor, assembly line style of division of labor, not only in the factory itself, but also across domains and within administration, which led to this kind of model being viable and reproduced around the world. And indeed, the vision of, for instance, a city for 1 million inhabitants, which Le Corbusier sketched in 1922, became reality around the world. For instance, you can see it in Moscow in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. There's a stark contrast as we move from this era of, let's say, repetition and simplicity of organization, relatively speaking, to what happens now, to complexity and agglomeration of individual statements in a place like, for instance, Moscow City. It's a big difference. And the difference is reflecting a difference in socioeconomic dynamics and patterns of life and work and collaboration. So we're moving from that static hierarchy on the left, which is bureaucratic and, demarcating zones of competencies from a top-down hierarchy, where every information is channeled through hierarchical supervenient nodes, versus a network which is much more about lateral flows of information and self-organizing of differentiated competencies, and coming together. Integration is also bottom-up to a large extent, because these big state bureaucracies have less and less decision scope, but also big vertically integrated corporations have been disassembled and have been self-transformed into internal market structures, into assembly, into network organizations, etc. These transformations started in the late 60s and into the 70s, and became quite prominent and prevalent and well reflected already in the early 80s. They also connect up meaningfully with the neoliberal transformations and revolutions of around 1980. And although these were not conscious elements, what was fascinating for me with the project of deconstructivism, and also particularly with Zaha's dynamic and complex work, was the anticipation of the kind of space which would fit such a situation. Postmodernism already gave hints, an idea of postmodern space as a layered space, where old layers onto, new layers onto old. But particularly here we're seeing nearly not a vertical urbanism, a horizontal skyscraper, if you like, but the element which Zaha was most proud of and referring to continuously is this idea of a void of intervisibility, interawareness, of flows, of movement, buildings that are porous, where there's offerings above, below, and all around. So something which we picked up and worked with also with vertical structures, where this became possible only later. So we are talking about, we're showing our work in Hong Kong, and here we have an interesting complex tower, the Innovation Tower at the Polytechnic. It's actually a design school. You can see here that we're lifting it up. We have a series of complex ground relationships. You can move right through underneath that, series of terraces and openings, and a whole series of atriums internally connecting up. So very untypical for a tower where you would have a central core extruded and no communication, neither on a floor plate or cross floor plates. Here it's all about these void being carved out. The small building, there are 4 atriums, 5 atriums indeed, and a series of connections back to the urban fabric through open terraces, etc. Now this topic of atria and terraces is important, and I add bridges. Vertical urbanism is also three-dimensional city. So this idea of connecting up buildings with bridges on multiple levels, of course, is a very Hong Kong idea. Here we're proposing something like this in our master plan for Singapore One North, which we worked on in the year 2000. And this is a industry knowledge cluster, actually several clusters coming together in the fabric. Here's the biomedical city, but there's also an IT hub and a finance hub and a media hub, etc. So vertical urbanism means sometimes expressing structure, differentiating structure. Towers, the program isn't just extruded and stacked. So there will be different conditions, there will be voids opening up, and for that the structure needs to adapt and evolve and make space and be on the outside so the inside is more free. It's a hypothesis we've worked on a lot of times academically as well in the AA design research lab and elsewhere. And so there's a number of those ideas, sometimes very tall towers, and you can see there's a differentiation between bottom, middle, and upper parts of the tower. They're quite different in their, you know, the way the forces are accumulating, and both vertical and horizontal forces, and that becomes also an opportunity for, and this reflected also in programming differently. And so Galaxy is that project in Beijing where it's maybe not super high, but it is a full-on three-dimensional urbanism with a lot of exterior public atria spaces, interior atria spaces, and bridging, connecting across and looping across a 3D texture that is, I think, quite an exemplary project we're still very proud of. Our own office, Beijing office, is located within this urban nugget, this little building as an urban district, interior urbanism, we also sometimes say. And you can see here the exterior space, the way it's stacked, the way vistas flow and activity is below, above, and all around. Major urban plaza. There's co-working here. There's a lot of small companies, thousands of them, perhaps hundreds at least. There's a lot of cafes, bars, food and beverage offerings in the retail component, which is basically a social hub. There's also, as I said, co-working zones and embedded in the retail zones, and the various atriums, and we paid a lot of attention to openness, open vistas, intervisibility, awareness are the key themes. And then with the same client, we made an attempt to create a larger cluster of towers. I only want to emphasize here the big atrium, because that's the theme which later came through. A big atrium which goes up the tower, but also opens up to the city. Twin Tower project in Nanjing. And again, there is a big conferencing center and podium and three-dimensional urban plaza, interesting lobby and atria spaces on the inside, big gathering spaces embedded in the podium, etc. So these are you know, our towers. We started actually with the first tower we ever built was in Marseille for a big shipping company, and it was interesting. It was also bridging, connecting the horizontal building, and that level was used for seminars. Meeting rooms stacking up in the center, so where the plan became deeper, and by the blade kind of edge on the edge with some elevators running up on the edge panoramically, and some atrium style spaces in the bridge level condition. Next tower, the Generali headquarters or tower in Milan, connecting up with a retail condition and well connecting into residential quarters. So the building twists to meet ground conditions and then to meet an internal axis lining up with the urban axis. Quite a dramatic project, but layered with respect to the podium and outdoor spaces, infrastructure, and the train stations close by connecting into us, and then connections across sections, both movement connections and visual connections. I was talking about structure and structural differentiation in our towers. So this is in Miami, it's a residential tower. It has a series of activating elements. There's a strong activated ground with restaurant and lobbies, then a pool deck with amenity spaces, then residents on top, another social space, a series of social spaces interspersing, and the rhythm of the structure gives also a differentiation into 3 flats and 2 flats and a single flat on top. And different balcony conditions, corner balconies, middle balconies, etc. The entrance, generous lobby spaces, the pool deck, where the structure is also reveals and has a series of intermittent niches and opportunities. And then moving up the tower, we're looking at the corner balcony, as well as the big large flats with a full stretch of frontal balcony overlooking the bay. Beautiful spaces where you can live as much on the terrace as in the interior. The structure opens up and splits up at the corner to open up vistas, and then a double height space at the very top for social gatherings, functions, etc., with double height spaces, beautiful ceiling, pool deck, and then connecting with air traffic through the helipads. Dubai, the opposite, a mixed use, and that's the main theme for vertical urbanism. This is interior urbanism, this is mixed use projects. We would like to see more density in the urban, but there's a hotel, there's apartments, there's office spaces. There's all the city components are in there, and basically we made it a single figure, a cube hollowed out, with a sizable entrance atrium and these bridge conditions at the top, basically connecting 2 towers, both at the bottom and at the top, and offering some fantastic helicopter hovering views. The hotel lobby, but also it's a general lobby as well. There will be exhibition spaces, there's lounging spaces, reception space, etc. And natural light flowing in from the top. Morpheus, a big hotel embedded in the City of Dreams in Macau, an exoskeleton allowing for a lot of really spectacular interior atrium spaces stacked up, again with a lot of connections to the city. So our atriums are never fully interiorized. Panoramic elevators to make it really a fantastic experience. Looking up through a series of voids which cross the tower. Panoramic elevators on both sides, and then these amazing suspended platforms. So there's a restaurant, you only see part of it here. There's another suspended space, which is the breakfast room. And all along views and vistas into the across the towers into the urban condition. Breakfast room higher up, another view into the restaurant. There's a gallery space as well. So there's a pool deck on top. I'm showing you everything. So, but we started also with smaller towers with this idea of an integrating light flooded atrium where collaboration between the companies who are different It's not a single company, but who create network conditions here with the wide corridors and using facilities on the ground, shared facilities, conferencing facilities, etc. And I think it's quite a striking, animate space as a work environment, very stimulating because it's networking for the network society. And the mega atrium pushed another level with a Soho, China, Lise Tower in South Beijing, where we again emphasize a lot of transparency into the urban, looking between the sides rather than being blocked by core, and having a series of bridges connecting in between as well. This interesting twist. It has to do, again, similar to the tower in Milan. There is a cut through the basement, a train running through, so that's why we in fact have to split the tower to some extent, and then twisting into the axis of the big road. So there's this kind of interesting mediation, but it also gives a lot of play and modulation to the surfaces, viewing up and down those three-dimensional surfaces where things tilt into view. It makes for not only excitement, but for more intervisibility. And a lot of transparency is achieved through that. These big urban windows are not just on one side, on both sides, so you sometimes see right through the tower, which I think is very exciting. Some fantastic views and play of light. There's a video, but I won't have time to show it. So looking down, looking up or down in either way, it looks fantastic. I don't have the looking down view. I made some snapshots, and at the top, you know, the bridges connect the two plates. The shingling facade made, you know, that volume isn't even a cylinder. It's an oval in both plan and section. Every element is unique. There's a beautiful swelling organic body, and these panels make this possible, give it a certain texture rather than looking faceted, and they flatten out to the big windows where you get a straight through vista. Wow, so this was something. There's similar projects in our portfolio. This is for Taikang in Wuhan, a big conglomerate, where we experiment with you know, this kind of scale of atrium. Just glimpses of that. There's a few more in our portfolio, unbuilt, but perhaps to be built. This one is fascinating. It's a cluster of towers making one headquarter for Oppo in Shenzhen. One of the towers is actually pure circulatory, to open up the plate and not having the core, and we always say that, obstructing the communication on the plate. We can then scoop out a big atrium and have the big views, big facades, true curtain walls, which are not clinging to each floor necessarily, and these amazing sense of openness and transparency, which is very important, you know, connecting up into visibility, into awareness, networking, where within larger companies, with respect to departments and projects, or within buildings which host many companies which might cluster together according to their co-location synergy urges. And that's very important. Co-location synergies is really what brings together, makes for cities, agglomeration, economies are not only about sharing amenities, it's really about collaboration, making, networking up, information exchange, and in fact, project collaboration. So here you can see the totally openness of that plate, sometimes with cross sections and pulling the cores to the side. Beautiful seamless facade. top of tower, I mean, we always exploit it for special event spaces with fantastic vistas. And we have several of these opportunities. I mean, one major one which we're going to exploit. This is amazing tower, twin tower with a lot of bridging again and atria, but also the terracing into the park of retail, food and beverages, places of exhibitions, spaces, galleries, cinema complex. It's a real city within the building, an interior urbanism, an urban building in the true sense. Amazing project where we pushing into visibility, into awareness, and this idea of connecting up on multiple levels, not only on the ground, but also on mid-level. I think it's very important. And then top of tower again, very special occasions. In Shenzhen, in the headquarters bay, so super headquarters bay, also where Oppo is located. I think it's going to be quite a sensation. Streets pulling through and in, you drop off and can move up the terrace on the outside or move through interior atrium access. Sketches we've been doing about TODs, train station with heavy buildup of accommodation in terms of urban infrastructure, retail, offices, residences, etc. And of course, you cannot miss to mention one of our most sophisticated and elegant buildings in the world. That's in Hong Kong warehouse on this fantastic site next to Bank of China and Foster's HSBC Tower, right on Chatham Gardens, and a fantastic site. So we have the green oasis and a series of terraces, green and the top of tower, again with terraces and vistas and green, and a beautiful facade. The core is pulled to one side, so you get a very grand and unencumbered floor plate. You see the green incisions, the green oasis underneath, connecting up with the pathways which still exist in this part of Hong Kong, of course. And so here we lift up the building, billow in. The first interior floor is a fantastic double height floor. Underneath the double height, a lobby and open green space. So these are beautiful spaces. Sorry, I'm jumping too quickly. That's the lobby space, the drop off, and the bridge which connects with into the urban network, taking up the elevator and coming up, or an escalator coming up to the double height large lobby with the balcony level again. So we can cascade up with escalators up to this point, and then take the elevator up to the levels, which are really these amazing, just panoramic plates, because the core will be behind you, and there's an open vista and column-free corners, and only a handful of columns, mega columns, holding up the building. Higher up, these recesses with green terraces, and at the top a fabulous event space, ballroom, with generous terraces, double height, glass roof, etc. quite an addition in terms of a beautiful social space for Hong Kong, and that's most central place. I think it will be a most popular and most sought after venue for special occasions in Hong Kong. Moving on to more urbanism proper, some of our sketches, and this is actually under construction now with a series of higher buildings, in fact, so-called Unicorn Island in Chengdu, a cluster of incubator buildings for the tech industries, for in fact, startup companies with great potential. There's also residences, there's a big urban plaza covering the road, so the site being dissected by a big road that just leads into underground parking, underground access, and all a full-on pedestrian world on top. First building built, an exhibition building, and with a lot already under construction. So here you see it with taller towers pulling out now. The plaza is here. Some special buildings. I mean, we try to do a lot of variety, the unity across difference, which has also an overall sense of unity through the overall centrifugal figure, but also through the cylinders and oval forms, and the terracing, for instance, which is a recurring feature which unifies that project. It's very green. It's like a garden city, but much more dense than what one would expect to see under the heading of a garden city. But the green terracing makes it feel a garden city, and also the proximity to the water, I think, is compelling. And you can see here that there is a certain amount of density, but also a lot of beauty and activation through public spaces, green spaces. The first building, as it was sketched, under construction, and coming to completion. These are not even the latest images. So there's a big exhibition pavilion to kick off basically the startup and unicorn village. Some beautiful spaces. And then the big urban plaza covering a lot of pavilion activation and some light wells as well, so that the street underneath isn't all dark. So you can get you get that 5th elevation or 6th elevation, because you have an underside as well as a top view, as well as the 4 elevation. So I think this is quite a unique endeavor with so many buildings, a big team trying to differentiate and have nuance and articulation. So differentiating residential from office building, from cultural buildings, etc., but having a lot of unity across all of that. So it's a big effort, unique effort so far, and it's just, I wanted to show this and also say anything larger would need multiple authors, but hopefully coordinate so there remains a unity across the variety, and not this kind of visual chaos where there's no unity and maybe a menacing kind of collision of styles and figures. So I want to finalize my talk with showing work. It's the direct challenge the City of London, which is in a way amazing, an intense cluster of vertical urbanism, but lacks that cohesiveness and becomes menacing and disorienting. So here's the attempt to take even a larger area, so anything, nearly the whole area on both sides of the river between the City of London and Canary Wharf, the second financial center in London, and having a series of 4 sites with 4 teams of architects and students in this case, and operating across the river with an intense 3-dimensional urbanism, which we'll show you, with an most intense activation of the ground plane, with towers which all have atria and exoskeletons and a lot of bridging between towers. So that's what I would call the new London, which we're creating here. You can see integration with stadia, with museums, with upper levels of publicness, not only have the public on the ground, but have it on mid-levels, on bridging, connecting levels. So true vertical urbanism, 3D urbanism, as well as a series of penthouses, which are amazing. So there's an attempt to have a lot of diversity, but also a lot of unity. The methodology of developing exoskeletons to set the interiors free, to develop these exoskeletons with so-called topology optimization. So these are not designed skeletons, but they are evolved through evolutionary optimization algorithms. So these are form-found, where you input load conditions, primary load conditions, and support points, and then in between those and within a bounding volume, the system develops optimal structurations. And there's an interesting, and it can work with asymmetry. So if the bridge hits a building, that can be absorbed elegantly, or if the ground conditions aren't symmetrical, if there's something underneath which don't allow columns to be symmetrically laid out. So this is the overview, and this is some glimpse at the methodology of experimenting with these topology optimization morphogenetic processes, and they're very different system, linear system, mass erosion systems, different types of those. And then there's also different translations with concrete, with timber, with steel. So with the attempt here to have, yes, a unified methodology, but sub-differentiations in terms of the particular tools, the particular optimization processes, as well as then the translation, tectonic translation processes. So you can see the variety of structurations and the variety of material theses. And I will not go into any detail. It gives you a sense of organic differentiation and variation and how this feels from the inside. Again, 4 different teams that work, each with 4 individual architects. So there's a lot of variety, but there's an enormous amount of unity because it's all parametrism, it's all tectonisms, even more particularly topology optimization techniques at play. And there would be a series of animations where we looked at the play of light across this slightly unrealistic degree of openness and transparency. But in this case, the circulation is running on the outside or in columns, more dispersed to not have a very heavy central core. Subsidiary hanging structures, because the topology optimization was only primary decks where we actually need the lateral structures to make an overall stability system. And then have secondary plates more disburdened from overall stability work and being more free, hanging there so they could move around and reconfigure as well. So here's one of those steel versions where always there are, these cross-sectional vistas to connect across levels, and an attempt to have a filigree structure, to have an optimized structure, no walls, and or at least have several levels quite open, so a conference center or co-working zone embedded in a tower which is otherwise more striated. So, and that these pieces of architecture are located in a 3-dimensional urban matrix where they make sense, where they are at that datum. There's a lot of those triple and quadruple height spaces, which create sky lobbies, which operate across towers, across the district nearly. So it's an attempt to have architecture doing an urbanist work. So again, congratulations to the group of students here under my leadership. I wanted to show that. And Zaha Hadid Architects and the AADRL have always been in close collaboration. You can sense that, how potent that is, I hope. And anyway, there's a little bit of future in here as well as all the build examples you've seen. And Thank you for the attention. Let's hope we have an interesting debate.
So thank you a lot, Patrik. So thank you, you're giving me so great insight into the future of the urbanism, not only vertically, but in a three-dimensional way. So I think it is always a human dream about high-rise tall building. We always want to go up. I think maybe 100 years ago, there's a movie called Metropolis. So it starts the chasing of a human being into the sky. And of course, some people said high-rise building is a kind of expression of egoism. Some maybe said it is about expression of the technical advancement of human beings. And some said that high-rise can save a lot of space on the ground. And also maybe some people say high-rise separate people slab by slab. But I think we have 100 years of experiments on high-rise already. And actually the life is changed. There is a new mode of living and new mode of working. And also design. So we now more and more concentrate about the human-centric, about humanity, about well-being. So what is the future of vertical urbanism or high-rise? So it's great that today we have 8 panelists for us to share their view. And our topic of today's roundtable panel is the current practice in Asia and its future. Definitely, I think Asia, we have not fantasy, but maybe actually they have a need in building vertically. So for all this experience and that in the past, what's come up in next? Maybe I introduce our panelists today. So thank you for Patrik Schumacher join us. And also we have Ms. Florence Chan, and we have architects Donald Choi, and we have Mr. Dennis Ho, and we have Mr. Anderson Lee, and we have Shelley Sira, and also we have Professor Patrik Taiben, and finally we have Mr. Simon Yu. I will introduce individually when they start their discussion. So let's start from Florence Chan. So she is the president of AIA Hong Kong chapter. So Florence, she is an experienced architect, not only in Hong Kong, but US and Canada. So let's see her view in the future of the urbanism. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Hong Kong Design Institute, and also Zaha Hadid Architects for having me today. Very honored to be here with such a distinguished panelist. Today's event is titled Vertical Urbanism. I think it's a very appropriate way to what I would characterize as a Tower 2.0. What I mean is, if what for the past 100 years, as what Michael has been saying, in terms of like how we develop tower, which is a lot of the time like repeated floor plans that keep repeating itself. I think Tower 2.0, or what we call the vertical urbanism, is a way of living that people can actually inhabit in a tower, in which where there are more different types of space, different variety of spatial experience that people can enjoy. And I think what Patrik just showed us is one possibility of what it could be. And in that particular aspect, as I am also an architect that practices a lot in designing towers, I want to focus on how this, what the specific requirement, meaning the specificity versus the flexibilities. Because a lot of the time, if you think about doing a tower, it is actually, you're kind of designing it to maybe 80%, meaning like there is the remaining 20% is deferring to the future, for the future occupier to be using it. So in a way, flexibility has always been a big terms and very important terms when designing towers. And I think as what Patrik was also mentioned in his presentation, how he was trying to push the structure to the perimeter in order to make the space more flexible. And I think that is a very interesting concept. Why? Because if you look at historically, buildings are really designed with very specific function in mind. Like in this particular case, with the Colosseum, like the possession into the game, how the people being able to view the game, and everything is very specific in terms of the program requirement. And it has been like that for the last maybe 2,000 years, in the sense that, or even like in Pantheon, how the contrast of the light, how you enter through the portico into the grand hall and into the oculus, like where light comes in. It has always been like everything is kind of programmatically driven, and it is how architects design. However, when you talk about like towers, this is one of my favorite articles from the SML-XL, in which I think Remco Haus has very precisely talks about the nature of a tower. He says like typical plan is an American invention. I'm quoting it not because I'm from the AIA, but it is a 0-degree architecture strip of all traces of uniqueness or specificity. It belongs to the New World. What it means is like when you are designing a tower, or at least like Tower 1.0 is what I'm considering, a lot of the time, what you are designing is for flexibility, because the sheer quantity and the floors that you're going to have, you don't know who is going to occupy it. The most safe ways to do it is to make sure that it is as flexible as possible. Like in this case, the Seagram Tower, what you see is like a lot of the time it's like really a rectangular box, even though it looks, formally it looks very rigid. However, it is this like regularity that gives you the flexibility of the usage. And that is where I think is deviated from what in the past 2,000 years, when you are designing different types of architecture, that a lot of the time, especially with office tower, that indeterminacy during the design stage is what I think the flexibilities comes in. Like in this case, there can be different layouts, different scenario as to how the space can be occupied. And I think that is where I found the idea of like a vertical urbanism in a certain way is kind of challenging these notions of flexibilities in a tower. And for example, like in this case, like Patrik talks about like introducing atrium. By introducing an atrium, in a way, you are also compromising the flexibilities. Or by having a very fluid form, interestingly, by having a very fluid form, you are also actually like have to be like balancing how much of a flexibility that you're going to have. So in that sense, I think in the Tower 2.0 or vertical urbanism, a lot of the time it is really a close balance of how flexible versus how specific you want to go. And I would be interested maybe in the later part of the discussion to hear the group what it thinks and where this is going. Lastly, I want to just bring up this building, the Chun Center, which is very close to the Mary that Zaha Hadid Architects is currently building there. I thought that was very interesting because if you look at the plan, it almost embodies what the essence of Tower 1.0, meaning like it is a square plan, doesn't really bias towards a particular side. Like every side have the same linear footage of views of curtain wall. And then it is very, in a way, it is biased, but not biased because it has a different like leasing depth with a rectangular core. So it caters for a variety of possibility of different sizes of tenants that could happen. In a way, it is very stable, static, but at the same time, it is very flexible. And I thought that was a good contrast with the two Mary, where right across the street, you have something that is a vertical urbanisms that have activities on different floor. It breaks away the repetitions. It breaks away that kind of like regularities to it. And I'm looking forward to like having that two buildings to have a dialogue in the future when you're representing like Tower 1.0 versus the 2.0 version. Thank you.
So thank you, Shadi. So maybe I introduce our second panelist, Donald Choi. So he is the president of the Hong Kong Institute of Architects. Also, he is the president of Hong Kong Institute of Urban Design. And he's now the executive director and CEO of Chinachem Group. So thank you, Donald, for coming. So hope you have insight for us, not only for architecture, but also urban design.
Well, thanks for inviting me. And thanks, Patrik, for an inspiring talk. I am a believer in the power of architecture and the use of urban design to improve people's life, advance human civilization, and ensure environmental sustainability. The 1982 peak competition by Zaha Hadid through Never Built was a learning milestone for me, especially her use of painting as a design tool. Hong Kong has a long relationship with Zaha going back 40 years. Now, in addition to the PolyU Innovation Tower, the city is also the location of Zaha Hadid Architects' latest iconic tower under construction in Central. They allow Hong Kong to have a first-hand experience of parametric architecture and the spectacle of vertical urbanism. I think we have much to learn from Patrik's vision that high-rise, high-density is not only about saving space and efficiency, but is about engaging the community and encouraging more social interaction. I will very quickly respond to Patrik's talk with 2 points that I believe are crucial to vertical urbanism in Hong Kong. And they are multi-level connectivity and programming flexibility. Next slide, please. Next slide. I think Zaha Hadid Architects have made multi-level connectivity one of their signature design features. By hollowing out the building with large multi-level voids and atria, people can experience the 3D spatial dynamic as part of an internal kind of urbanism informed by the flying bridges connecting into multi-level ground planes going up and down the building. The connectivity also extends beyond the individual building envelopes to connect buildings in cluster. Starting in 1960, Hong Kong has also experimented with multi-level connectivity as an urban form. It started with the practical needs to connect buildings so people could get from one building to another without fighting the vehicular traffic on the ground. People and businesses welcome the pragmatic technical urban intervention with elevated walkways and underground tunnels because of the functional convenience as well as the increased commercial value for the connected upper floors or basements. This multi-level vertical connection system provides us multiple ground planes for the city, which is important for vertical urbanism. It suggests a new typology for tower design, but more importantly, I think it provides us choices on how a city can be navigated. For example, one can ignore the Hong Kong street grid and walk from IFC shopping mall in Central through the elevated walkway, passing through the 24-hour passageway inside the second floor of Central Market, get on the Central mid-level escalator, which by the way is the longest outdoor covered escalator system in the world, and arrive at Conduit Road, which is about 135 meters above the level when one started the walking journey. One can also enter Hopewell Center at Queens Road East and go up 15 floors and exit to Kennedy Road. I think vertical urbanism is not going to just limit itself in high-rise building. It actually should be promoted, in a city with hilly terrain like Hong Kong. It is about multi-level connectivity in 3D. It brings verticality into the urban design thinking. In Hong Kong, with its many underground mass transit stations, the vertical connectivity means not only going up, but also can go underground as well. The second point that I want to make is about programming flexibility. Next slide, please. Arata Isozaki developed the city in the air when he worked for Council Tanki in 1960. In 2011, Isozaki proposed the winning design for the Central Market Revitalization Project with a new functional program, including elevated public garden deck and swimming pool. Additional floor space with mixed use and vertical connections were proposed to be added to the old market, originally opened in 1939. It is a pity that the scheme never got carried out. But I think the point is really a more diverse mixed-use programming matters because it can encourage or discourage placemaking. Patrik has advocated having different function in the tower to make it more vibrant and intensify the social interaction. The standard stereotype of a high-rise with an excluded form and a homogeneous usage throughout the tower is insufficient to make a vibrant community. The accelerated technology advancement in the 21st century require us as architects and urban designers to embed intelligence and flexibility in our design solution. For vertical urbanism to work, we need to promote mixed use in verticality, dynamic zoning to allow programming diversity to accommodate community needs at different times, i.e. not only functional zoning in 3D, but bringing in the fourth dimension of time to enable a better use of our urban infrastructure. I am optimistic that Hong Kong vertical urbanism, supported by high density, multi-level connectivity, and last but not least, a framework that allows mixed-use flexible programming, has the opportunities to become one of 21st century most desirable urban centers. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. Definitely, I think starting from the hill town in Italy to Isozaki to Patrik's ideas of vertical urbanism, multi-level connection and multi-level activities definitely live together with the high-rise urbanism development. So thank you a lot. So maybe I introduce our next panelist, Mr. Dennis Ho. So Dennis, he is the Director and East Asia Regional Design Lead of AROPS in the area of architecture, urban design, and landscape architecture. Also, he is the co-chair Education and CPD Subcommittee of RIBA Hong Kong chapters. So thank you, Dennis. So we're looking forward to have your view.
Yes, thank you, HKDI and Michael. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Patrik, Florence, and Donald for sharing your views earlier. There's certainly a new kind of energy, I think, and focus on vertical urbanism that is so important in the globalization of our cities. Stay on the first slide, please. As mentioned, I think cities are getting much more complex, right? Partly because of our freedom in mobility, culture, lifestyles, and technologies. And to deal with these complexities these days, we are increasingly relying on new technologies, such as digital twins, AI, machine learning, to help us understand how to design and also how to grow our cities. So first of all, I actually believe that in the future, we can no longer just consider or even design individual buildings, but we have to consider groups of buildings together and also their infrastructures in a more holistic manner. I think the vitality of the city and the opportunities will come from the successful integration of these different systems together, be they building fabric, transportation, open spaces, communications, or sustainability of a much, much wider context. So I think singularity on its own is probably not going to get us into the next era of vertical urbanism. Next slide, please. And of course, vertical and compact cities like Hong Kong brings together people much more in terms of movement, exchange of knowledge and ideas. But it also brings along congestion, crowdedness, lack of personal spaces. I think we're all very familiar with it. However, the new wave of mobility systems, such as AV, EA, UAM, will really allow us more freedom to interact and explore in many different ways. And I think our future buildings really must embrace these kind of new mobility strategies. We will no longer have towers on a podium, I believe, or entrances only near the ground, but a series of vertical communities that become multiple ground planes, elevated social spaces, such as those projects that were presented by Patrik earlier. Towers will be conceived in very different ways, I think, and vertical movement experience will also be very, very different, not only in commercial, but also in residential projects. And I believe Patrik talked about this idea of the three-dimensional city, which may finally become the new normal in the next few decades. Next slide, please. And of course, people are naturally drawn to open spaces in compact cities like Hong Kong, where each person only has around 2 to 3 square meters of open spaces. In Hong Kong, for example, a very, very low figure compared with other international cities like Singapore, New York, London. No matter how great the buildings are, I think, people will still tend to move outwards to be outside with families, friends, or even strangers. And as a harbourfront city, Hong Kong's urbanism must include and embrace the harbour, I believe. We need to bring it closer to where we live and where we work. It is such a dominating and opportunistic asset that we have yet to fully tap into. And to create a balance between being compact, but at the same time, being open and outward looking. And I really do hope that this principle of opening outward and inviting open spaces into our city fabric will actually become a prerequisite of any development in the future. Next slide. And of course, nowadays, we cannot talk about urbanism without the consideration of decarbonization. And I look at a lot of commercial architecture. I still believe that the agenda of decarbonization is very light. I think we need to look a lot closer at how to become net zero in 10, 20 years' time. And also, this is quite well specified in the Hong Kong Climate Action Plan 2050, especially for our commercial architecture, where the majority of the carbon emissions come from. This not only requires step changes in how we design, but also how we live. We're going to be designing for the next 2, 3, 4 decades ahead. Both nature and technology really need to work closer together. For example, we have recently developed a zero carbon tower concept organized by the Hong Kong Green Building Council and Swire Properties. It is a fully naturally ventilated commercial office tower using what we call a breathable, productive, and active facade system. It produces twice the amount of energy than what it would need to consume using advanced renewable technologies. It also provides a green area that is 3 times the site area, and it can become net zero within the first 8 years of its operation. So I think in the future, every building must have a green agenda, and I think that is very important, and that really will help us to shape our architecture within this vertical urbanism. Next slide, please. So finally, I would like to show this painting by Wusis Wong. It's actually one of my favorites of the Hong Kong cityscape. In a painting, it actually merges the landscape, the buildings, and the open spaces together. There's a sense of cohesion in the fabric and in the ambience. I just think that this is maybe one plausible scenario of our future vertical urbanism, that we have a much more seamless transition between our buildings, our open spaces, and nature. And they play off each other's strength to become this total ecosystem. So with this, thank you. And I would like to hand over to our next panelist. Thank you, Michael.
So thank you, Dennis. So you show us a more array to consider, like water bodies or skin of the building. So definitely it's a totally language that we have to develop. Okay, so maybe we're moving forward to our next panelist, Mr. Anderson Lee. So Anderson, he is the founder of the Index Architecture Limited. He's also the Associate Professor of Practice in the Hong Kong University Department of Architecture. So welcome, Anderson.
Welcome. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Hong Kong DI, for inviting, and thank you, Zaha Hadid Architects, for a wonderful lecture. Very impressive indeed. I would begin by a confession. I have no slides. Because I do believe that after seeing all the slides, that we have a visual applause, so to speak. And then actually, I find it, I was struggling to attack this subject matter in a matter of 5 minutes. Because when I combine the subject, vertical urbanism in Asia, if I split these 3 words up individually, I kind of know what they mean. Vertical, everyone kind of see what this is, right? We have seen Patrik demonstrated wonderfully already in the presentation. And urbanism, this is starting to get a little mushy for me, right? What is urbanism? For me, different country and different state have different kind of urbanism that they are going through in different location. So for me to try to kind of generalize what urbanism means in a matter of 5 minutes with slide presentation, I'm sure that I'm going to make a fool out of myself. So I decided not to do that. And finally, the word Asia is even more complicated for me, because within Asia, we all know that we're having the symposium in Hong Kong, which is only a tiny dot in Asia. With Southeast Asia, you know, Southwest Asia, North Asia, Northeast Asia, all this kind of thing. At the same time, it represents different meaning to me. I'm very glad that actually Patrik has started his slide with the Fordism and post-Fordism. And then eventually, Florence has this presentation talk about specificities versus flexibilities. Because to me, when we're dealing with this kind of subject matter, it seems like that we are doing immediately some kind of comparison, some kind of duality comparison of what's before and what's current and what's next. To me, what I can share, probably my idea and some of my thinking on the vertical urbanism in Asia, to me has to deal with certain issues that when I was listening to the lecture and trying to prepare for what I'm going to talk in 5 minutes time, I couldn't help but to think about when I look at a 40-some slide versus a post-40-some slide, it immediately reminds of, it's the making of a car, for example, right? We look at the cars nowadays, right? We see almost, when you look at a Tesla or a recent Porsche and all these things, they all have a similar kind of share a design language that we can kind of tell. It's definitely the way how the shape and the form it represents. You can definitely kind of know that this is a contemporary car. But then at the same time, we all kind of look at it, how we would like to own a 1930s Mercedes driving around, right? And that provide what I call the eclecticism versus the homogeneity, so to speak. That duality all of a sudden happens to me and start to do this comparison again. And in Patrik's presentation, one word and another image stick into my mind. It is the project that he talked about with a huge, gigantic master plan in Chengdu with a new park, right? The science park, the new industry park. I think Zaha Hadid Architects was trying to create varieties within unities. That's the word that I believe that Patrik talked about, which is wonderful. I think that's what we're all trying to create, that sense of unity, but with varieties within it. Kind of like when you go to see the cars, they kind of all look the same nowadays, like the Tesla, the Porsche, and the Nissan or whatnot. But every once in a while, I always in the back of my mind, wouldn't it be wonderful to have, a Spider coming along, right, from 1960. Just add to that idiosyncrasy to this. So that, to me, another image that Patrik showed was the chaos, the visual chaos that he said, and when you look at the picture of London, he has a picture of that. I was asking myself, after all, is it really that bad then? I don't have an answer, right? When I'm given two images, right? Whether one extreme is this varieties within unity or total chaos. Now, to me, that immediately started to have me thinking about, so what holds Manhattan together? It's not the individual buildings, we all know that. It's just the city grid, which is the unity, is the city grid. And then the chaos and the variety, which gives energy and excitement to the city, which I call is the ultimate urbanism in that way. It's that kind of varieties, which doesn't base on any form or any visual languages then. And then when I start to further think about it, immediately Ken Frampton's critical regionalism came to my mind. What does that mean then? In architecture, Ken clearly argue and define for critical regionalism in architectural practice. I'm wondering, when we come to urbanism, vertical urbanism in Asia, whether such thing as regional criticalism in critical regionalism in Asia, does it make any sense then? Or if it does, what shape and form it might take? That would be my understanding on vertical urbanism in Asia. I don't want to take up more time because we have a big panel here and we have roundtable discussion afterwards as well. So that would be the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
So thank you a lot. So I think definitely it's interesting. You open up a lot of topics that we can discuss afterwards. Whether it's urbanism is a self-organized object or is a master planned thing. So I think definitely let's put it at the back of the question and Q&A section and let's discuss about this. Okay, so maybe we're moving forward to our next panelist. Ms. Shelley Surya, sorry. And she is the curator of the design and architecture in M+. And I visit M+, and you have a very good collection of not only architecture, but about megacity and Asia city development. So definitely it's a good subject for you to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction, and thank you again, HKDI, and for inviting. This is really a large panel, and I feel a little bit perhaps out of place here because of all the eminent practitioners and academics and in the field. So I am going to be very clear that my perspective for this 5 minutes is purely going to come from from a curatorial perspective and a historian at the same time. And so largely to do with the project that everybody had been talking about, which is kind of like the genesis of Hadid's practice, but also her relationship with Hong Kong. So I just wanted to really kind of like share, as we are trying to display this work here, we could see in the Hong Kong Gallery, Hong Kong Here and Beyond at M+, the P Club competition, which of course other museums like MoMA also has. This is another version of the drawing. Is part of our collection, and we also acquired another set of drawings that are in the other room. And so what I wanted to share is that my own discovery, as we have to write the labels and understand more about this work, is that I also realized that from this article, which is basically from Vision magazine, published in 1983, of the competition itself and being a winning kind of a design, and reading Zaha Hadid's essay, entry essay for this competition itself, really revealed a few things. And I guess I just wanted to go back again to the to this first slide. So the reason why, if you see how we placed this work next within the section called Conditions, next to actually Liu Shaoquan's painting called Hong Kong at Night. And so again, I think going back to what Dennis Ho had actually even alluded to, Wushis Wong's painting, it's like from the artist's point of view, how to look at the city. I also felt like when we actually saw this work, it was, and also reading her essay, it was Hadid's very perceptive kind of a reading of Hong Kong and how she actually understood it to be a kind of her work became almost like a response that is counter, but also aligned with the spirit of what she interpreted the city to be. And so that's why we placed this work next to each other. And then the text that I'm referring to in her essay was really how she talked about how there needs to be a kind of programmatic inventiveness in this scheme that is both something that is related to Hong Kong and the city below, but also a relief from. So it's almost like a sense of a very productive tension of trying to be alien to, but also embedded within the condition of the city. And so that's the kind of, I find very, something that only kind of came out more, or revealed to me more clearly as I read the essay that she wrote for this competition itself. And so I think even the work in itself, I felt was a very, again, this whole productive tension of something more than just a sense of fractal or kind of fractal kind of architectural language of the suprematist, but also a sense of trying to use that as a basis of reacting to the congestion by having this whole free flow kind of like levitated planes of her work. It's not so much just a point or a reason for trying to be different or trying to have a different kind of expression, but it's also kind of a very kind of a perceptive response or I guess a reaction to something that's very different from the city itself. But at the same time, still knowing that the program itself is a leisure club, it is meant to be hedonistic in nature. And so that's something that she had kind of aligned herself to as well in the program. And so I think I just wanted to also share a couple more slides. The other way in which we are showing this work, the peak is upstairs in the East Gallery, which is a more architecture and design focus that is really related to architecture design within the topic of future cities. And so future cities here for us is really highlighting projects that are not so much buildable. It's projects that are a little bit off the grid and trying to really push a kind of a buildable boundary or even imaginable. And so Archigram's archive is definitely next to it. So we place Hadid's work next to Lebius Wood, but also Archigram just as part of this whole very canonical works that really try to kind of defy, you can say, gravity or the nature of things. At the same time, also still very much, I think, upon reading a little bit more of her article, that this whole void that she created is actually a kind of excavation of the site. And the material of the site itself is actually meant to be used to build parts of the building itself. So this is something that is I would miss if I did not read this essay, because it's the sense of using the materials that actually she dug from the site to form the building was not something that is very often talked about within her scheme. And so I just wanted to kind of, really kind of, again, this is just some sort of me highlighting parts of it about how it defies nature, but it's not trying to destroy it, and how the excavated rock itself is really meant to be creating this whole man-made polished granite. So again, this whole relationship with nature and the topography of the peak itself was very much a part of her intention. And so then, and even I think even going further, this is part of the essay that really goes into the details about how it's meant to be built. And of course, again, so I think the whole idea, but for me, it is so much more than an expression of language, of architectural language, but really down to the detail of how this thing could actually be made, and also how it relates much more closer to the site on the level of the material, and also the topographical, but also on the level of what it means to relate, I guess, to the urbanism that is seen below the peak itself. It's something that I felt, that is something that is worth reflecting. And I guess the question of whether this, I guess, is applicable to how we consider the future of so-called vertical urbanism today, I think it's just as relevant today, where this closer reading of not just something that we replicate, of not just something, of not being simplistic, I guess, about what urbanism is very important, and to have a much more kind of like, again, exercising a very productive tension about what it means to embed ourselves in the environment, but at the same time also being very inventive, or even to some degree alien in what we are providing as something new, but at the same time still very much relevant and really being able to activate existing conditions. So that's my very short reading and reflection on this. Thank you again for inviting.
Thank you, Choi. So definitely it's a great space and great exhibition in M+. But guess also, I'm reminded you please also come to Hong Kong Design Institute Gallery. Okay, so go to both gallery. Okay. Anyway, so thank you a lot for sharing, and maybe I move to our next panelist, Professor Patrik. So he is the director of the School of Architecture of Chinese University, and so he is an urban designer, researcher, and educator. So let's have Patrik for the topic. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So thanks very much to HKDI for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and also to thanks also to the Zaha team for organizing all this event. I want to start with a little provocation. For me, vertical urbanism is very different to vertical architecture, and I would say much of the things that we are seeing is more on the vertical architecture side, and maybe because I'm quite interested in cities, I'm more interested in the vertical urbanism part, which also is much more difficult to achieve. So we all are probably familiar with these different quite interesting studies of Hong Kong, which have started, I think, with a very nice book by Shin Muramatsu, I think in the 90s, about the kind of multi-layered aspect of Hong Kong, which is so inspiring for many of us. I think many, like foreigners like me, this is probably one of the reason why we're here in Hong Kong, because we constantly have to look at those kind of particular urban situation. We also appreciate, I think, these kind of very interesting architectural solutions that probably do more than just kind of being a building, but basically, like here, the Hofeld Center, link between different parts of the territory, which of course on Hong Kong Island with this kind of steep topography is very, very interesting. And I think it was a bit kind of sad that Patrik didn't show one of his best projects. I think I find like this beautiful student dormitory for HKUST, which actually is working with this kind of multi-layered condition. And I think it's very convincing to me. But what is, I think, very important for this vertical urbanism is, to me, that's often kind of linked to the urban infrastructure, usually to the metro. Even if we have it in Tung Chung, I think it works still, even without topography, kind of okay, because we have a metro line on the, we come out on the upper level, and it works on different scales and levels. The other thing is what for me is very important, and I think also that Donald has alluded to it. In fact, Donald's presentation is in many points similar maybe to my one, is the question of the programming, and not only mixed use, but particularly how in this kind of office world and so on of Hong Kong, for example, how we can integrate certain kind of public programs. And I added one photo, which is one of the more ugly, I would say, very, very unspectacular buildings at the United Center in Hong Kong, which I find is very intriguing. When you go inside, you come from the metro line, but then also you can have, even in the middle of a very expensive place, a noodle soup for $20, a small kind of Indonesian or Filipino store to make your photos. You can go to the transport department and then have all the other things. So that for me is very much linked to vertical urbanism, because all kind of different programs and price ranges and public offices and so on can be in the same kind of building. So that's very interesting. Some time ago, I wrote an article about basically a view from the New Territories on Hong Kong's condition. And of course, we know all this and beautiful books that we can write and admire this situation. But Hong Kong's situation probably now usually looks like this, right? That's basically the trend, how the city is built in Hong Kong. When we move out from Hong Kong Island, right? I think many, of course, of us stay in Hong Kong Island, but maybe because I teach at CHK, I'm usually in the other part, which is over 50% of the population. And all the mechanisms of how we built the city today in Hong Kong is this: we still built a lot of vertical, right? But basically all this complexity, all this interesting in and out and so on is no more there, right? So, which is also linked to the way how land is subdivided. Like, for example, the number of intersections is totally different in those parts of Hong Kong. And that is probably a reality, not only in Hong Kong, but also in Indonesia, in mainland China, and so on, right? And in those places, vertical urbanism often is relatively sterile, right? Because often we have monopolized land ownership, large land lots separated by wide roads. And also the question is how this kind of urbanism then also works with the current situation of the pandemic. For example, of course, in the 1990s, early 2000s, Hong Kong transformed into this kind of global city according to those theories at that time, and basically built everything up to basically provide an urbanism for regional headquarters and so on. Everything had to be like tacted in like 20 minutes to the airport check-in and so on. But we see that this urbanism actually, I mean, the last 2.5 years, how often we use the Airport Express, and the whole question of having these kind of amazing developments, at least for the last 2.5 years, didn't make any sense. So now is the question, what is the future of vertical urbanism? There I come to the end, right? Of course, there are other opportunities to work. This is Ken Young's ideas in the 1980s. I think he started this idea to basically create a kind of similar richness of open spaces in the vertical, using extensively green and of course sustainable urbanism. I think Dennis was also alluding to it, and of course very much in the work of Woha. And then those kind of new projects that we see, particularly in Singapore, many of those projects, but of course we all know probably this project, which is very successful in joining all kind of public amenities into vertical urbanism. And of course, I made a little line here because I think if we see these kind of richness, how the opportunity would be for Hong Kong to use this to give access to the topography, to this amazing hills that we have, and so on. I think we could learn from all those kind of contributions for Hong Kong. So maybe I stop here. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Professor Hadid. Thank you for showing the book. Actually, I have a little article in the book that you showed at the beginning. It's, I think it's 20 to 30 years ago. Okay, so, and maybe we go to our final panelist, Mr. Simon Yu.
Hello,
so
hi everyone.
Hello.
Thank you.
So he's the principal of Zaha Hadid Architects in Hong Kong. Okay, maybe you can start now.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Thank you everyone for all the contributions, and it's and it's also a tough act to follow after Patrik, so I don't really have that much to really talk about, but maybe I'm having a bit of trouble trying to share my screen from here. Can it be done from your side? From the Hong Kong DI side, technically speaking?
I think so. So our technical support.
Sorry about that.
Coming. All right. Please give a little time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I just had a little bit of a. But anyway, I guess I could continue anyway. Just not maybe take too much of everyone's time. I think a lot, basically a lot of people have made some very good points today. And especially I think when we talk about even the genesis of Zaha's work in Hong Kong. I mean, I did have maybe a couple of slides to show with, of course, the peak. I mean, Patrik had elaborately sort of covered that. We really started in Hong Kong, and I think through that project, and Shirley sort of covered some points about that. Besides the project itself, I think from my recollections of what Zaha talked about when she talks about Hong Kong, she has a huge affinity for Hong Kong. She always talked about Hong Kong as being a very porous city. It's also, I think, when I think about the time back in the 80s when everything was pretty much made in Hong Kong, very different time then, 4 little words on every single thing from garments to, plastic rubber ducks. We've come a long way from that era to where we are now. And I did have some sort of maybe images to sort of talk about at least my, yeah, of course. Yeah, so through these images that Zaha had done, I mean, besides the peak, she certainly celebrated a big element of Hong Kong, how porous it is, how interconnected it is. And Hong Kong as a city is quite unique. I mean, you can pretty much get anywhere within about 25 minutes unless you live in the New Territories. But, and I think she talks about layering, she has these interconnectivities. And I think that sort of might have planted a few seeds of what, later on in the repertoire that we'd had shown afterwards. If we go to the next slide. And, the next slide is really just, of course, Hong Kong as we know it, as we recognize it. It's surrounded by a lot of greenery. It's quite unique in that sense. It's very well preserved. It's actually not so much known to tourists and visitors because they'll spend most of their time shopping or on dim sum in the sort of more metropolis, Hong Kong, but it's surrounded by greenery. There's a lot of pockets of parks, waterways. And of course that's all cited as unbuildable and what have you. But this I think almost was a bit of I think given what sort of the British colonials had done, they've done a very good job. I mean, they created a subway station that I think that we could have only dreamed of back in the UK in the 80s. And I think in sort of many respects, I think we learned a bit from this unique city. Of course, we've got similar, rising cities, in Japan. I mean, we are talking about Asia Japan, the most populated city, Korea, has seen a massive change. New cities like Singapore. But of course, I think when we go next to the next slide, I think, of course, the big topic when we come to density, and of course, this topic of vertical urbanism, and where a lot of our work currently are at the moment, and ones that Patrik have shown are in China. And if I recall, I mean, going to the next slide, if I recall, I think when I first arrived in China, I think back in, 2004, 2005, this part of town in Guangzhou where we built the Opera House was nothing. It was a tabula rasa. It was, on this fishing village, the mayor had this vision to actually relocate an entire city center and start anew with a new city center. And if you go to the next slide. And then, of course, and this is only like 15 years ago, a little more than 15 years ago. And a little bit, more than that, I think maybe it's less than that. So 10 years ago, when we worked on this project in Changsha, I think Changsha is a river city, east and west. On the west side, it's fairly, on the left side, that is where our site is. It's very fairly undeveloped. But you can see all that progress from in just a matter of years. We're seeing this massive growth, so you can see from 2010, it became from a very green part of the city to becoming very sort of gray and urbanized. Now, I guess we can go to the next one as well, because I don't want to take up too much time. But I think what we've done with our individual projects and some of our master plans, we talk about some of the individual moves and some of the things that, I mean, obviously we're talking about things like matters about sustainability and how we can actually and move people as well. Mobility is a big topic as well, I think. I firmly believe that the next battleground, I think, in technology is probably in automobiles and travel. But I pick up this slide because I think when we talk about growth and development in China, especially in a place like China, that is coming up at such a scale. We're not only just talking about sort of how we create individual buildings and maybe some certain techniques, but also how these buildings are also connected to each other. And this is a project I think that Patrik showed earlier as well. It's a TOD, or a transport oriented development. So I guess I had showed previous, let's say, master plans where they would have, maybe 10 years ago, there seemed to be a big influx on cultural buildings and stimulating the migrations into big cities and like that in China, productions, of course. But of course, I think around these train stations, around infrastructure, we're seeing a massive amount of interconnected development. And I think we have a lot of questions, of course, in how we address that in terms of, because they're very dense and they're growing vertically. And it's important, of course, whilst we may remain very, we as species are very adaptable. And we are very adaptable because I think, even how we live without mobile phones was very different to what we are doing now. We can't live without them. I think a lot of us wouldn't want to actually be too disconnected with the very basic things like nature and simple well-being. So I think it's important to bring some of this sort of maybe old-fashioned elements into our buildings as well, even downright to materiality. And I think we've even see that in a lot of trends, even down to interiors, etc. But anyway, so I guess thank you very much. We can go on to the next part of this discussion.
Yeah. So thank you, Simon. So that's great to share different experience, especially in China. And I hope the Hong Kong Peak projects actually can be realized. Maybe some funding can put and realize the project. That will be the landmark of Hong Kong, definitely. Okay, so maybe it is a good time that we move to our next section about the Q&A. So for the guests and all of the participants can type in the question. And so I definitely have numbers of questions in my pocket, but I will put it back first. So how about Henry? So you have any question to our panelists?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of questions popping up through social media and participants in the audience, but I think maybe better for us to focus our discussions among the panelists first. Actually, from the discussion and all the presentations, thank you everyone for your contribution. What's interesting is about this discussion of the future, right? We're looking into this new topology of vertical urbanism. However you want to define it, we're thinking of new strategies to make a better world for the future for people. So Simon just mentioned about adaptability. You know, people are very adaptable. So I just want to kind of throw this on, you know, this question or this kind of statement to everyone. What do you think of bringing things back to sort of the essentials of how we live? Simon just mentioned about the old-fashioned ways of buildings or materials and whatnot. How do we balance that? Because if you ask me as a tourist, whenever I go visit a new city, I probably want to go sit at a cafe on the street side in Paris versus spending most of my time indoor, right? And I think that's sort of the human nature. And I think Dennis mentioned about, you know, the advantage of the Hong Kong harbor. Various speakers also talked about this, you know, us being outdoors or wanting to be more engaged into the city. So with this new topology, with this vertical urbanism, and, you know, Patrick's mentioning about interior architecture, interior spaces, how we link, how we encourage, or how we need to encourage social interaction. How do we do that? How do we balance the two?
I just wonder if I feel the urge to respond to some of the challenges and comments and contributions from the other panelists. If that's allowed. I mean, first of all, I mean, in terms of Donald's emphasis and on the multi-level connectivity and this uniqueness of Hong Kong in this respect, it was mentioned by a number of other panelists, is fascinating. It really works well. And actually it's a necessity because you have so much population density and activity density in public spaces that you know, sidewalks are already becoming congested, even with a third layer, and there could be more. It's that contrasts with other cities where the separation of public circulation was tried, going partly underground, going overground, and those sometimes at university campuses this was tried, and it was kind of abandoned because of the lack of maybe overpopulation density. And you then kind of kill urbanity because you don't have enough quantity. So here we have to watch out that quantity switches into quality, and certain concepts rely on a certain overall quantitative condition of density. So I think that's fascinating. And I believe in urban concentration as being more sustainable, but also more exciting and more, and it was the basic trend in the post-Fordist era. And what hampered that to some extent was planning regulations. You know, where there was suddenly emerged that idea of distancing towers, and you keep in the end the same overall occupation density, so that in the end most tower cities have no more than Paris, which comes along without towers. But Hong Kong is special and different, and that's what I think is important to promote it. I wanted to also talk briefly to Florence challenge with respect. I mean, by the way, I love Ramkola's typical plan. That essay is really fantastic, but I don't think we're in that condition. And what I find we always thought of is both in terms of urbanism, you could then apply that to the typical plot in a grid, like Manhattan grid, and the typical buildings all being generic and equal, that being supposedly the most flexible. No, not in my view. For instance, when we went to Singapore, the One North, we actually differentiated plot sizes. We would also like to differentiate floors. as a default condition. That's not making it hyper-specific. That just means we have a matrix of choice and more flexibility of self-sorting various conditions, various sizes of companies, etc. So I think flexibility is a very, very important value, but I don't think the generic is actually delivering the highest level of flexibility. And on that, it's very important also what Donald was saying about, Hendrik was saying about the programming flexibility, and planners get in the way often. And the great example of that is actually Soho, China, in the first set of projects. Actually unfortunately before we came on with our projects, there was really a true flexibility. So they built the buildings, they increased course and circulation, and then had literally left it open where the units would become residences, would become offices, or would become retail outlets. So you have hair salons and next to small offices, next to residences, mixed up all the way through the building. And I think that has a certain vibrancy and a true flexibility. Now, so a lot of this isn't possible because of planning regulations being locked in an older era and privileging values of distancing and overlooking, which I don't think we need to let the market decide for that. So that's I think what I wanted to put in it. I mean, many other great comments and resonances with respect to interior urbanism and recognizing of the post-Fordism condition. I want to pick up on Anderson one more point. So he's saying, yes, with the celebration of chaos, the vibrancy of that, and the chaos of Tokyo when it emerged as an image against the backdrop of a still kind of monotonous and sterile, let's say, Western cities. Yes, I agree with that. Compared to that monotony, that chaos and is a recognition of an urban intensification and diversity, and again also that kind of the small grain of that. But I think there's something beyond that, which I call complex very good order, where we have unity cross variety, and we make that differentiation, that rich co-location synergy network legible, rather than allowing each fragment to express itself uniquely and independently. And then you get, in a sense, a strange generic sameness of all urban figures around the world. They all now look like Tokyo chaos, if you like. And that is the strange paradox where over abundance of individual articulation generates a lack of urban identity, which everybody has been so lamenting around the world, that all cities are now these, I have a phrase for it, garbage spill urbanization, which generates this white noise, chaos, sameness everywhere. So anyway, these are my, let's say, pushbacks or comments with respect to, and by the way, and Shirley's insights very much welcome. And it's true, as Simon said, there's a lot of seed to relate, and the example of Hong Kong as unique territory. And again, there's something very unique in respect to three-dimensional networking through the topography, density. And I absolutely agree, the distinction between vertical architecture and vertical urbanism is critical. And of course, single-handedly, you can't generate an urbanism. So that's why I showed the AA project, I mean, the research and academic projects. And when we build our building, they're either if they're groups of building, yes, we have a degree of vertical urbanization and urbanism, but otherwise our buildings are kind of standing there waiting for being connected to. They have all the valencies expressed, but they remain isolated endeavors, of course, because that's really something where urban planning, as well as in the sense of also taking away planning restrictions and allowing creativity, both entrepreneurial developers' creativity and architectural creativity to start weaving that network.
In response to that, sorry, I have a question that I really want to ask Patrik. Actually, this is something that's in the back of my mind. With such a large practice that you practice globally, right, with all these mega projects that we see, very impressive. when you deal with the clients individually, like in respective countries, right? I'm sure that you have a very intimate interaction with them, generating the programmatic needs and mixture and all these things. How much of these, when they talk to you, it's like, oh, I want to aspire to be the city next door, the image that they see, and can you kind of repeat that and outdo them? And how much of that they're looking at their own culture and their own economic developments, their own needs, that can kind of generate the specificities of the project. That I'm very curious, because nowadays the image rings over everything. So clients would be like, well, I want to build another, Zaha Tower. That would be awesome because I have the money, the power to demonstrate the fact that we can do this in the project. That's not to diminishing your role, but I'm saying that you have a very unique role to kind of educate back to tell the clients that, hey guys, you don't need that kind of tower in your stage of urbanism and specific economic and social development. That to me would distinguish a vertical architecture versus vertical urbanism then.
Yeah, I mean, quite right. I mean, there's a real, Soho China is the company where we had most of this deep communication, where we embedded ourselves, myself, into the office as well, because we were much younger at the time and we could do that. And we had iterated project ideas across a number of sites, etc. So there we had it. And we did have convince the client about this idea of, atrium bridges. And there was a congeniality with respect to even their prior projects. But otherwise, I think what is important, yes, you're right. A lot of times clients come with a preconceived idea. Maybe they're image oriented, but usually we break through this. We don't want to start with preconceived images. We build up a project from the ground up based on fundamental principles, but a lot of local conditions. And we're trying to do something specific. And the way we can do that usually is because most projects, public or private, are now competition based. And so at that point, we just received the brief and we are left alone to come up with something and which then becomes compelling. And then we have a chance to present and explain as well, and then open up the client's mind, but also the client's decision-making is often fortified through jury panels, which include architects. I mean, the client in private conditions has the final choice. But I think that's a very healthy condition where the client, they understand what life process they want to engender, but they can't immediately already image the solution. So they pose the problem, and then we really are the ones who are working on the solutions for that. And that's an important, let's say, a detour which prevents the short-circuiting of a client thinking they know what they want in terms of final image.
All right, I think Dennis, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I really just want to touch on some of the aspects that we've been discussing, and perhaps one thing that we kind of might want to talk about is livability. I think Hong Kong is a very expensive city, as we know, one of the most expensive cities in the world, in fact. But up on the list of livability is actually pretty low, for international cities anyway. So I definitely think that Patrik talked about the quality versus the quantity. In terms of livability, it's actually quite difficult to define. I think everyone has a different meaning of what livability is. Whether it's more open space, better living accommodation, better workplace, easier mobility, cheaper education, all kinds of things. So, I think vertical urbanism, in my mind, really needs to capture some of those aspects. And I think somebody mentioned that, maybe, yes, I mean, it's not really so much about the architecture as such, but it really is about the elements between the architecture, whatever they are, that actually help us to elevate our livability. And in fact, if you think about the Victoria Harbour, everybody said we have very little open spaces in Hong Kong, 2 to 3 square meters per person. But in fact, it's because the Victoria Harbour is so inaccessible. Therefore, nobody really utilizes it. But if you can make it really accessible, then you're already uplifting the public realm of Hong Kong, which I'm sure will lift the livability aspect. And certainly, one of the things that, again, we mentioned this, and I think Patrik also touched on it, is the planners and actually the local planning regulations are not really helping us to elevate our livability. So I think maybe next time maybe we should include one of the planners in panelists and really kind of talk a little bit about how we can all work together to improve our livability. And I think whether the building is organic shape or square shape or rectangular shape probably hasn't got a lot to do with livability. It's other aspects that drive it, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. If I can come back very, very briefly, because Michael at the very beginning also mentioned, for instance, something like well-being. And what I want to stress is, I think that we should, I'm not believing this kind of concept where you use basically physiological parameters only, or you have an ahistorical conception of psychological needs, what human being would like to have, green and certain colors. No, I think we have to focus on productivity and vitality of the cooperative process. I think we feel happy when we're productive, and that has to do that we're plugged into a network of collaboration, that we feel of careers progressing, that we be quickly in many different places, that what Simon mentioned, 25 minutes. And there's a lot of adaptability about the concrete conditions. They're historically changing what makes us productive. What is a productive condition? They're very different in the 21st century than the 20th century. And as Simon said, we now all live with mobile phones, and maybe in the future we live in a metaverse, and whatever makes us productive, I think that's incredibly important, both of course really for have material prosperity, so to also cater for creature comforts, but on a psychological level, I think it is a concept of productivity which is very important, and that changes, and that's a new condition which I think deserves a lot of proximity. So for instance, space standards, which planners still insist on how much square meter you have and how much overlooking a sunlight and you have in your apartment, they become secondary. They actually price out people, they force them into provinces where they feel isolated and they cannot develop, where they're not productive, not connected in, and they would be quite happy with a much smaller patch, maybe with some overlooking. Maybe they like to overlook and being overlooked, and they can have substitutes for their, be living out more in an urban texture than living, having a big kitchen in their home. So I think there's a challenge where I think we need to allow, first of all, the self-directedness of city dwellers and also companies, the way they want to construct their locations, and we need to understand the open-endedness of what our psychological needs are. But I think one thing is most important, which is that productivity, which is now the knowledge economy, has a lot to do with with connectedness. That's why I believe in urban density and also increasing density, and we can't use sterile or, let's say, ahistorical standards to prevent what wants to happen with respect to developing these cities, and that holds a lot of places back, and we have less concentration than we would have and maybe should have.
Yeah, and may I invite Donald? We have a representative from our so he's the chairman of the Chinachem, and he's also an architect. How to balance in between this architects' vision and the real estate market?
Well, I think actually, the goals are quite aligned. For developer, they also want to create a livable environment, a place where, the customer would feel happy. So again, I mean, this comes back to how we can use placemaking to really add commercial value. As I talk about in my presentation, I think, for example, when Hong Kong started, with the overhead walkways and all that connections, is from a very practical and pragmatic point of view. First of all, the convenience from the user, but also the landlords feel very happy because, with that connection come with increased commercial activities and higher rental. So I don't think, they are exclusive from each other. What we want to find is really the overlapping area where architecture, design, real estate, commercial, economic development, back to Patrik, really, advocacy of productivity. How can we actually improve human productivity? Therefore, we have more to share among our community and society.
Thank you, Donald. I think, Hendrik, you also have some comments.
I think I just want to respond to Patrik. I agree that productivity is something very important, and maybe there's a lot of greenwashing also that exists that not everyone needs the same. But I think that when we see Hong Kong, most of us, we lived through the pandemic in Hong Kong, and when you see the lifestyle, it's like everyone is kind of as soon as possible, they're all in the countryside, right? The countryside now, is full of people. People take tents there and they live out there and so on, right? Now, I would say that's quite amazing in Hong Kong that you can have high density and green, right? But I think that one thing that probably with vertical urbanism we could use much more extensively is the access to, particularly on Hong Kong Island, but also in other areas, access to blue and green, right, through vertical urbanism, right? Like this Hopewell Center that I showed, we could use this way more, right? Because then we can be productive and so on, but we can also in 5 minutes be on a hill, right? And that's something that is not possible in every city in such a kind of next to each other, no? And I think that one could use this much more, not only TOD 5 minutes where I can walk in general, but we could also say, well, can I be in 5 minutes at the water and on the hill? And in Hong Kong, it would be with the right push, it would be actually possible, right?
Thank you.
So Henry, maybe we accept one question from the floor. And sure. Then because we start to be overrun a little bit, so
yeah.
So let's have one question, and then maybe it's the end of the question Q&A section.
Sure. Yeah. One of the questions from the audience, your practice, referring to Patrik's lecture, your practice seems very concerned with the visual validity of architecture, so much so that it is representational in the postmodern sense of meaning. I wonder what is your opinion on other non-visual functions of architecture, such as material and environmental performances?
Great question. So yes, I do believe in the importance of visual communication, in fact, of the built environment. And for me, that is not something extra, a thrill, a spectacle, which is, but it's inherent to the social functionality of the built environment, because we talked about all this kind of intensity of collaboration, connections. You have 100 offerings at your fingertip, but you need to be able to perceive them and be able to navigate towards them. So the city is an interface of interaction and communication, and as such, the visuality is all about making transparent the offering and empowering the individual in really utilizing this, because you're not really teleported, or if you only have to look at that blue dot on your phone and have a GPS connection, then you only have preconceived destinations. And that's not the way. We need to have also a serendipitous encounters discovery processes in the browsing and navigation process. And for that, it's very important that we don't have a sterile monotony where nothing becomes transparent, or visual chaos where everything is hidden in the chaos. That's why this, what you call visual fluidity, we discovered that in the design, in the process of moving from something like the celebration of the Tokyo chaos and deconstructivism of layering, interpenetrating, and piling in complexity, and then it becomes illegible, so illegible that when you work on your own project and drawing, you don't find your own parts in your own drawing. You realize something is going amiss. So parametrism and that fluidity was emerging from the let's say, imposition societally of complexity and variety, diversity of destinations and complex integration, and then maintaining legibility in the face of complexity. That's where this comes from. And it would be another lecture where I would demonstrate that. So there is a functionality and performativity of appearances, which is very, very critical. And that's why I wouldn't juxtapose it against issues of functionality. And by the way, I think architects are in charge of social functionality. The engineering disciplines deliver technical, material functionality. Of course, we are intercepting them highly collaboratively because what they are proposing impacts that visual text which we are focusing on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think for high-rise, graffiti is the limitation for a talk or a panel speaker. So time is always a limitation. So we have to end our Q&A section here. But I have two good news for everybody. So firstly is for the panelists. So I will try to organize, maybe we can gather together to see the exhibition. But of course, let's see the situation of the pandemic. And for all the guests and students, so our exhibition will be extended to the 1st of May. So let's see the pandemic situation. We hope that it can reopen to the public. And we will try our best to acknowledge all of you. And hope you can really see the exhibition on site instead of online. Of course, you can see a QR code here. You can go online to see our exhibition. So thank you very much for all of our guests, students, panelists. So let's have a good night and let's have a great future for the urbanism in Asia. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.